So I just want to welcome everybody to this webinar today. Um, the topic, untangling trauma, I think is going to be very, very interesting and informative and hopeful, helpful to all of us here. But first, let me introduce myself. I'm Kylie Hanisch, and I'm founder of Return to Zero Hope. My son Norbert was stillborn back in 2005, and I'm just devoting myself to helping other parents feel less alone on this journey, and also educating and empowering both grieving parents and the providers that care for them, so that we just help people navigate this journey with more confidence and grace and support. So within pregnancy and infant loss, we know that we experience grief, right? Our baby has died. It's a high probability that we also are experiencing a perinatal mood and anxiety disorder, whether it's after our loss or after subsequent pregnancies. But I think it's also important to acknowledge that pregnancy and infant loss is a traumatic event for many of us. And I don't think that people always understand that. And that language is not always used, but I just want to make it really clear that it is traumatic. Like, our baby has died within us. We've had to make the decision to end our baby's life, possibly, or a baby has died when they were an infant. All of this is unexpected and out of order, and it's traumatic. So, which is really why I'm passionate about talking about mental health. So today, I'm very excited to introduce our speaker, Katherine Vilnrotter, who is going to dig deeper into what trauma is and how we can help ourselves so that we don't have to live debilitated by our experiences. Katherine and I have a mutual friend, and so I'm really glad that we had the opportunity to meet, even though we're on different coasts. I'm in Los Angeles, she's in Maine, like farthest ends of the United States from each other. But we've connected, and she's going to bring her diverse personal background of careers. She was in architectural design, development finance, construction project management, but most recently, mental wellness, which is why she's here today. So Katherine's career and her life took a 180-degree turn when she experienced a life-altering trauma while she was volunteering with the Peace Corps in Central America, which resulted in 4.5 years of full-blown PTSD. And over the past 10 years, Katherine's been on her healing journey, collecting tools and approaches and knowledge to help her heal. She's extremely passionate about sharing these tools with others through her wellness practice, The Love Cure. And one of the most powerful approaches that Katherine enjoys sharing is the human givens approach, which is what she'll be speaking about with us today. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Katherine and let her take it from here. So thank you, Katherine, for being here. I'm really grateful.
Of course, thank you for inviting me. I'm just going to share my screen. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. All right, can you see that? Okay, great. So my name is Katherine Vilnrotter. Thank you for the introduction, Kylie. Just going to move on. Okay, so my goals for this talk are very simple. Three goals. The first one is to give you a little more hope than you came here with. The second is to give you a general understanding of the human givens approach, which is something that helped me so much, really gave me my life back after this life-altering trauma, so that you understand this fairly simple approach with these simple pillars that I teach to 6-year-olds all the way through 90-year-olds. So everyone can understand it, which is why I love it. It's so accessible. So I'm going to give you an introduction to that. And my third goal is that you have more of an understanding of how you can create and utilize tools to help you get your needs met, to deal with your trauma, or to understand where that limit is that, okay, I'm experiencing something that I can't deal with on my own, I should get help. So understanding those limits can be very helpful. Okay, so I'm going to start by telling you a little bit about my story and my experience. I was in the Peace Corps. I was gang raped in my sights, extremely traumatic. I was medevaced. I had to cut my service short, which was also traumatic. So all of these layers of trauma. And I came home and I was confined to the back of my closet for about 9 months, just completely wasn't able to function. And everybody experiences trauma and PTSD differently. But for me, I was completely secluding myself. I couldn't handle anything. We're going to learn a little bit more about that, what was happening in my brain at that point, so that I was just being triggered constantly. And I really thought I was going crazy because I didn't understand why. I didn't know what was happening in my brain. So this 4.5, 5 year journey for me of full-blown PTSD, really something that was so almost re-traumatizing for me was that the mental health industry didn't have any answers for me. The message I was getting was, you're broken, you had this horrible thing happen to you, and you're always going to be broken. You're going to have to learn how to deal with that, live with that going forward. We can't help you, is basically what they said, which was not good enough for me. So over this 5-year period where I was really experiencing these intense PTSD symptoms, I was trying to learn as much as I could about my brain. As Kylie mentioned, I was doing architectural design. I was totally in a different career, but I was on this path trying to discover myself, trying to understand what I was experiencing, because it was so foreign to me. It was so foreign. I didn't know. I had these weird sensations in my body. I felt like at one point that my bones were vibrating. It was very strange. So all of these weird things that I had never experienced before, and nobody could give me any information. Nobody could tell me what the cause of this was, or what was going on, except that, well, you could journal, or you could go outside. I was not getting any tools really that were helping. So I was seeking information, and I was seeking things that I had to learn how to listen to my body in a way that I had never really had to before, because it was so intuitive. Okay, I would go about my day, but in this period, I felt like I couldn't trust my body anymore. So it was not only building this relationship of trust with my body, it was learning how to communicate and what these signs, what these experiences meant, so that I could kind of untangle my own trauma, which is where this title comes from. So I was figuring myself out, learning about my brain and my body and what was going on. So about 4.5 years into this journey, randomly, I discovered the Human Givens approach. And it wasn't even for me. I had kind of stopped looking for myself. I was volunteering in this rape crisis center, counseling center that was giving services to rape survivors. And I remember I was just doing admin work. I was checking them in. And I remember looking and saying, wow, one day something clicked in my head that I should start paying attention to what I was doing in a different way. And I noticed some of these people were coming in for 10, 20 years. And once I realized that these people they were in the same boat that I was, nothing was helping them. And so I started asking questions. What kind of therapy are you doing? Are you seeing improvements in these people who are coming to you for so long? And the answer was really no. Sometimes people get better, sometimes they don't. We don't really know why. And so on behalf of these people, I decided to reignite the search. And I thought, I'm going to go home and I'm going to Google PTSD treatments that are effective for these women, mostly women. And I found Human Givens. And it was something that when I was looking 5 years before, it didn't show up in any searches. I had never heard of it. So I start reading about it, and everything that I read was exactly parallel to what I was experiencing. And for the first time, I was like, oh my gosh, they understand. They get what I'm going through. And so I started reading more, and I contacted them, and they actually, so this approach comes out of the UK and Ireland, and they were a couple months later going to be having their first workshop in the US. So they're, said you should come. And so I went down to North Carolina. I was in New York at the time. And I went to the first ever workshop of human givens in the US. And so the first half was basic human given stuff, actually, that I'll be reviewing later in this presentation. And the second half was about trauma. And they needed a demo for the rewind. So the human givens trauma treatment is called the rewind technique. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that later. And so I'm in the first row. They need a demo for this treatment, and I'm raising my hand, and they pick me. And so basically I got this rewind in front of a lecture hall full of people at this workshop, and I could feel my brain change. This 30-minute session in front of 200 people, I could feel my brain start to calm down in a way that I hadn't felt for almost 5 years. So of course it wasn't instantaneous. It was over the next few days and weeks and months. I noticed that this extreme fear, I was living in tunnel vision for almost 5 years. And even though I had gotten a job and I was functioning, I wasn't living. And so I was in this little kind of cubby for all these years. And after the session, I could feel those walls kind of relax. And after the first night, I remember I was exhausted after the rewind. So I just went back to my room and I slept for about 4 hours. And I woke up in the middle of the night, as I would, very often with horrifying memories or intrusive memories or flashbacks. And I remember waking up that night after the rewind, and I could just almost like hold this memory in my hand, like I was looking at it from the outside for the first time in 5 years. And it was like, and I was looking at this memory, and I remember thinking, wow, this horrible thing happened to me, but it's over now. And at that time, in that moment, in the middle of the night, I knew I was going to be okay. And it was this weird pivotal, it's so hard to describe, but I could just feel this shift in that moment. And days, weeks later, every day I could feel a little more relaxed, and it's subtle. And really when I noticed was looking back at something that had happened. So I would be going about my day and say, wow, I just had a conversation and I'm calm. That really would have been triggering for me, last week or 2 weeks ago. And so it was a lot of that and a lot of reflection, and I could feel my world expanding. And so after 4 or 5 months, it was a huge milestone for me. I forgot the anniversary of the attack. So this was a huge thing for me because every year prior, I remember dreading that anniversary and just, I know I built it up more. I was just constantly triggered, it was all these compiled triggers, which I understand that now. And I didn't understand that at the time, but it was this huge buildup to the anniversary of the attack every year. And this year after the rewind, I forgot the anniversary. So it was amazing. It was amazing. So long story short, this, from my world being so destroyed really, and not knowing who I was and having this be my experience, to be able to really rediscover myself in a brand new way and understand my body in a new way and understand my brain in a new way and what I need in order to be well, was really quite an amazing journey. So the two things that I'm going to talk about today are the pillars of the human givens approach and the rewind. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in the brain information processing. So these are the two things that I'm so passionate about sharing with people, because they gave me my life back. So that's my story. So this is my little not broken guy, realizing that I was not broken, that this was what my brain was doing, and it was doing what it was supposed to be doing to keep me safe. It was trying its best. So the 4 pillars of the Human Givens approach I'm going to be talking to you about today are emotional needs, resources, our innate resources, and the barriers to getting our needs met. Those are the 3 main kind of pillars of Human Givens. And then there's these new understandings about information processing that can help us understand trauma and how that relates to our experience of information in the world and how we process it and where trauma comes from. Okay, so first, emotional needs. So I love the thesis of the Human Givens approach. They're always so positive. When all of our needs are met in balance, it's impossible to be unwell. And when I first heard that, it was so different from every other approach that I had heard of. And I did a lot of therapy when I came back from Central America after being attacked. And nobody gave me that kind of hope. So that statement in and of itself was extremely helpful for me. Because if I can see these 9 needs that we all have, and I can strategize how I structure my life to meet those needs in balance, I can be well too. I can be happy again too. So this approach, Human Givens, they kind of flip therapy on its head, and they're not looking at wellness through a pathology lens. They're looking at it kind of on the other side. They're saying, okay, what does it take for a person to be well? So that's why these are kind of organizing ideas, and I call them pillars. So these pillars. So we have physical needs and we have emotional needs, and we all pretty much learn what we need physically. You know, when we're growing up, we know that we need food, we know that we need water, we know that we need sleep and warmth and all these things for our physical bodies, right, to stay alive, to stay healthy. But a lot of times we're not taught about the emotional needs, which are equally important. So I'm just going to go through these 9 needs, which we all have to varying degrees, depending on our composition, how and where and what cultures we were brought up. See the one right in the center, privacy. You can imagine someone brought up in Bangladesh is going to have a different understanding of privacy than someone who was brought up in rural Maine. So just understanding that where we are also contributes to how and to what degree of each of these needs we need in order to be well. So everybody's a little bit different. So we all need a sense of security. We have to be able to feel safe territory, that we're not constantly under attack from our environment. We need to have some kind of semblance of control. And of course, we can't control everything in our life, but we have to be able to feel that we can do things that will create an effect in our environment. We can control certain aspects. We can make decisions that affect us. Status. So it's not really high status. So this emotional need is more being recognized for your unique offering, who you are, what you bring to the table, whether it's in a relationship, whether it's in your family or friendships or at work, whatever it is, being recognized for what you do. Achievement. And that's something that we all need. And that's really the antidote to low self-esteem. Understanding that you can put effort towards something and create something. So that's kind of linked with control, right? I can choose to do something and I can achieve something in my life. And whatever that is, it could be something as small as I'm going to, learn, well, learning a language is not a small thing. I can learn something new, or I can, change a routine, really anything. Privacy. Privacy is such an important one, and it really allows us to reflect on ourselves, reflect on our lives, and what we're experiencing. And like I was saying before, we might need, depending on who we are and how we were brought up and what we, our cultures, we might need varying degrees of privacy, but we all need just some amount of time to kind of integrate what's going on in your world, how you fit into that world, to just kind of exhale. I think of the privacy need as an exhale, right? So the next three, intimacy, community, and attention, are, I see them as being very linked. So intimacy is not necessarily romantic intimacy. It's having at least one person in your life that accepts you, warts and all, exactly as you are, that you feel like you can really be yourself and really sees you and appreciates you for exactly who you are, okay? And community, having a sense of belonging. And whether that's in the community where you live, or an academic community, or a support community, or a friend group, really, it doesn't matter. Feeling like you're part of the wider, a wider group, however you define that, and however can be applicable to your life. Attention. Attention is a form of nutrition. And it's not just giving attention, it's also receiving attention equally. So it's really an exchange. So we need to be able to have people, other people in our lives that will receive our attention. We need to give attention. And we also have to have people in our lives that will give us attention. So it's this exchange that's really important. And I see those as being intimacy, community, and attention as being very, very connected. And potentially something that has been difficult in the last year for a lot of us to meet with all of the lockdowns and everything. So it's something to be mindful of. And meaning and purpose. And this is such an important one. And there are three ways for us to get this need met. If we feel like we're needed by someone, that's a way we can get it met. If we are being stretched or stretching ourselves, so it's either training for a marathon or learning something new, stretching your mind or stretching, your body, or you're working towards something to expand either a skill or an understanding, a concept, whatever it is, you're stretching, you're growing. And the other way is believing in something bigger than yourself. So whether that's a religion, or whether that's a cause, whether you're really passionate about saving the environment or animals or anything, being part of something bigger, a cause, and feeling like you have something to strive towards, broader understanding. So these are our needs, and we all need in some capacity, to some degree, to have all 9 of these things met in order for us to be fully well and balanced. And when our needs are not met, when our perception of these needs not being met in the future, when we have that, we experience stress. So that's what stress is. It's our brain's perception of, oh, my needs aren't getting met, or, oh, in the future, I'm going to have trouble meeting my needs. So here's an example of that perception. Let's say I have a job. All right, it's a really steady job. And all right, my sense of security, because money could be tied to my understanding of security. And then there's a rumor that starts around the office, and people are talking about layoffs. I might start to get stressed because there's a new perception that, oh, I might have my sense of security be threatened. So even though it hasn't happened to me yet, I haven't lost my job, I could still be experiencing that stress because my brain can understand what is a potential outcome, right? So that can induce stress. Okay, so unmet needs equals stress. High extreme levels of stress is trauma. And really, I really don't like the word trauma because it has so much stigma attached to it. But really what that is unprocessed information that's stuck in our limbic system that's being triggered to, pattern matched to. So we all need to have these needs be met. When they're not met, we get stressed. And when there are high levels of stress, we can experience trauma. Okay. Innate resources. Okay, so we're complicated creatures, right? We've evolved for a long time, and our needs are pretty complicated. We have nine needs, right? So these needs have evolved along with us to become more and more complicated. And alongside these needs, we've evolved these innate resources to help us get our needs met. So oh, I think this is covering. I wonder if I can move this. Okay, so there are these 8 basic innate needs that we have the capacity of developing and utilizing in order to help us get our needs met. So I'm just going to go through these really quickly. So rapport. So the ability to connect with other people, to build rapport. And you probably noticed that a lot of those needs are socially, are tied to social interaction, right? They're socially oriented. So having the ability to connect with other people, with other humans, is really important for us to be able to meet a lot of our needs. Long-term memory. So we have this great big brain, right, to store all of these memories so that we can go back and remember things and say, okay, what happened when this happened? Okay, so you have this like filing cabinet, and you can use that to help you figure out what to do to meet your needs in the present moment, right? And you have this rational mind, which is a calm, all the shades of gray, this neocortex rational mind, where we can think things through, where we have logic, and we can use our long-term memories. We can go back into that filing cabinet, get information, and think about it, right? To try to solve problems that we're facing in our everyday life. Dreaming brain. So this is something that's very interesting. So as we're going through our day, we have this expectation. There are these emotional patterns, these expectations that are activated. And if it is fulfilled, then our brain puts it away. But if it's not fulfilled, I'm going to give you an example of this. If it's not fulfilled in our dreaming brain, we have to close that loop, because otherwise our brain is going to be scanning the environment to try to fulfill that open emotional pattern. So this is something that's very important when we're talking about being triggered and trauma, because each trigger or emotional pattern that is activated in our brains, if it's not fulfilled, they're gonna stack up and pile up, and you're using up your brain bandwidth, your brain energy, to scan your environment to fulfill these emotional patterns, to close them and put them away. So your brain is constantly doing that. And right next to it is pattern matching. And those go hand in hand. So as you're going through your day, all the pieces of information that are coming in through your sense organs have an emotion connected to it. So as an emotional pattern is activated and we're scanning our environment to try to fulfill that pattern, we're building up these emotional patterns. So if we have a bunch of them by the time we go to sleep that are not fulfilled, we're going to dream metaphorically to close up all those patterns. So it's kind of like the emotional custodian of our brains, because otherwise, so it closes up all these patterns so that we can start the next day fresh, and we have all this bandwidth in our brain so that we can take all the load of the next day. So if we didn't have this mechanism of dreaming to close out these emotional patterns and put them away, clean out our brains, so that we can have full capacity, we would just be stacking more and more and more, and we would get overloaded, and that can lead to psychosis, among other things. So that's dreaming brain. It's a wonderful thing that allows us to clean out the emotional patterns in our brain. Pattern matching is also how we learn. So we have information, there's an emotion connected to it, right? And as we get more information, as we grow up, so think about a little kid. We have these patterns of things. We have a really, maybe like a shape like this. I don't know if you can see me. And we might understand that that's a table because we've seen that shape in various forms, even if we haven't seen the exact table that's in front of us. So we're always, as we see more tables, we're embellishing that pattern, and it's growing and it's growing, and we're understanding that there are more types of tables, and there are more colors of tables, and there are more shapes of tables. So that's how we learn. Our brains are pattern matching machines. So we build on what we have, the information that we have, so that when we're 5, we have these little patterns, and as we grow, we have these more detailed, complex, embellished patterns of understanding our context and ourselves within those contexts. Okay, imagination. Imagination is our reality generator. It's an amazing tool. It's a wonderful resource that we have. And what it allows us to do is to try out solutions to problems in our mind without having to actually do them in the real world. So you can think something through and imagine, okay, what would happen if I did XYZ to solve my problem? And you can imagine, oh, that wouldn't be good. Or, oh, that would be a really good idea. And then you can try it out, and maybe you're right and maybe you're wrong. But it allows us to be a lot more efficient with how we're going about our day, how we're problem solving in our world, in our lives. The next one is emotion and instinct. And emotions and instincts they're like our compass. They show us directions. They're prioritizing the information that comes in. So like I was saying, as information comes in, it gets an emotional tag. So all information stored in our brain has an emotional tag. We might not necessarily be aware of it because some emotions are really low levels of arousal. Others are really, really intense, like fear or lust is equally, can be equally arousing. And so what these emotions do is they prioritize information in our brain. So very important. And the last one, but definitely not the least, the observing self. And the observing self is our ability to reflect on ourselves, to reflect on our lives. And it's kind of how I was describing that memory that I had after the rewind. I was able to kind of be outside of it and like turn it around and look at it and observe it. And our abilities to do that for ourselves, to observe ourselves, is extremely, extremely helpful. It's an extremely useful resource. And we can only do that when we're calm. And we're going to talk about how important keeping our brain calm is. Okay, so these are innate internal resources that we have. And they require skills to utilize in a constructive way so that we can meet our needs. So it is possible to utilize these resources in a way that's not so constructive. An example, imagination. We can be very imaginative and solve problems, and that's a positive, constructive way to use that resource. But we can also use it in a destructive way. We can ruminate and we can get into a negative spiral of thoughts. And really that catastrophizing kind of idea. And the negative rumination is what causes depression and high anxiety. So this same mechanism, this thing that we have in our brain, this resource, we can use it in a positive and constructive way to help us meet our needs, or we can use it in a way that's not so constructive and that can actually prevent us or make it really difficult for us to meet our needs. Okay, so these are our internal resources. We also have external resources or life resources. We have people in our lives who love us, who want to support us. We have skills, we have education, we have physical things. There's so many types of resources. So having an understanding of what our needs are and an understanding of how do we take inventory of not only our life resources, but also understanding our internal resources and how we can use all of the resources, everything that we have access to meet our needs in a constructive way. So that is the main goal. Okay, great. So that's the main goal of the Human Givens approach. Now, they also recognize that there are barriers to meeting our needs, and there are only 3 types of like buckets to barriers that can prevent us from meeting our needs: toxic environment, missing skills, and trauma. And that could be physical or emotional trauma. So toxic environment. Toxic environment. So our needs are, I kind of think of them as buckets, right? We have these empty buckets of needs, and you have to go out into your environment and collect things, emotional nourishment from your environment to fill your buckets of emotional needs. If you're in an environment where there is no emotional content for you to draw from, no emotional nutrition, if you will, it's going to be really difficult, if not impossible, to meet your needs. Okay, so you need that. Skills. You need skills, like I was just describing, to utilize your resources in a constructive way. So that's like the imagination example of, I can use it to help problem solve and be constructive, or I can use it to cause anxiety and depression. So understanding how you're using your skills and then helping to train your brain to use them in a different way. And then trauma. So there's physical and emotional trauma. So it's damage to the guidance system. We're calling your brain and your faculties your guidance system. So if you have one way for this to happen, physical trauma, if you get hit in the head by with a 2x4, you're probably going to have some portion of your brain be affected. And then there's emotional trauma, and that is when you flip your lid. And I'm going to talk about that in the next couple of slides. So when we are triggered and when we have this traumatic fight or flight response, we lose access to our resources. We lose access to our neocortex for the most part, and the rational thinking, the shades of gray, all of that good stuff, where a lot of our resources happen in order to help us meet our needs. So those are the 3 types of barriers. Okay, great. Now we're going to talk about processing information. Okay, so this is the APET model. And any of you who are familiar with the CBT, they talk about ABC. So this is basically that, except for with a little addition based on new research about pattern matching and emotional triggering. So I'm going to show, I don't know if you can probably see me really small. This is my favorite brain diagram. And this is talking about the A. So there's 3 parts of your brain. There's the brain stem, which is where information comes in from all of your sense organs from the environment, comes into your brain, and it's sent off. And you can see with these 2 arrows, one going to the limbic system, that blue part, and the other going to the neocortex, that orange part of your brain, and that's that walnut looking brain, cortex here. This is very diagrammatic. So this is the 3-part brain. So this is the limbic system. This is the neocortex. So if everything goes well, a piece of information will come in through your sense organs, and it'll simultaneously be sent to both of these 2 parts of your brain, the emotional brain and the slow, rational thinking brain, the neocortex. And it'll take about 1/10 of the time to reach the limbic system as it does the neocortex. So that gives the amygdala, which is part of the limbic system, it's kind of like the bouncer, plenty of time to determine whether or not this piece of information is safe or not. So the limbic system is where you have your emotional reactions. It's black or white thinking. It's yes, no, good, bad, life, death, so it's this very black and white thinking. The neocortex is where all the shades of gray happen. It's that slow thinking. It's the rational mind. It's where all of that, where your context and your memories, all of that, when you have access to that part of your brain, you can think that way and you can be rational and deliberate. So if the amygdala decides that this new piece of information that comes into your brain is safe, it's calm, it's not triggering to something that's there with a high intensity emotion, it's not going to do anything. And it's going to continue, that piece of information is going to continue on to the neocortex, that orange part, and it's going to be processed. You're going to think about it. You're going to be, oh, what does that remind me of? And the pattern matching, you're going to expand your understanding of whatever piece of information that is tied to. And so your brain will organize it and put it away, basically. So it'll become part of your context, of your understanding. So this, let me see if you can see my arrow. So yeah, so this brain is when you're not triggered, this diagram right here. So then your brain stays metaphorically intact. This other diagram, so if the piece of information comes in, it's sent to both of these 2 parts of your brain simultaneously. And then if your amygdala, your limbic system, determines that there's a pattern match and that this is a scary thing. So what it's doing is it's pattern matching. It's saying, okay, here's this new piece of information. I'm going to look at all my high intensity information that I have stored here from past experiences and events in your life. If there's a match of something that was very triggering, very high intensity emotion, it's going to sound the alarm. So it's going to send all of those stress hormones, the cortisol, the adrenaline, all of that whole cocktail of stress hormones. It's going to release them, and you're going to flip your lid. And so that's what that dotted red line is. You lose access to all of those resources, all of those slow, rational thinking resources, your personality, your morals, your intelligence, and you don't have access to that. So you flip your lid. So you're reacting out of emotional patterns. And anyone who has experienced any kind of trigger knows that, you can almost not even remember your name sometimes. It's which has nothing to do potentially with what the piece of information is that was triggering to you, but you just lose access, you just can't process. And this mechanism is a good thing. This is trying to keep us safe. Our brain is on our side. And this was something that I struggled with when I was in the throes of PTSD. I didn't understand why my brain and my body were trying to hurt me. I felt like they were fighting me, like they were against me. And once I understood this, that my brain is actually trying to keep me safe. So it's this emotional reaction of, okay, if I'm, out in the woods and a bear starts charging me, My brain doesn't want me to be thinking, oh, look at that bear. Oh, it's so fuzzy and furry. It's so cute. I wonder if it has cubs, because I'd be dead. And so that's the point of cutting off that type of thinking and that part of your brain, so that you can not even think about it. You can just run or do whatever you need to do to, do everything you can to get out of that situation. So once I learned this, that my brain is actually trying to keep me safe, it's doing the best it can. It really was a huge thing for me. So this is, if we look at the APET down here, so there's an activating agent, right? A piece of information that comes in. There's a pattern match that happens in the limbic system. And that's our brain asking, what's this like? What is this kind of like in terms of information that I already understand, that I'm already holding? And there is always going to be an emotional pattern that is activated. So it could be a really low intensity emotion where there's no kind of stress trigger, or it can be a high intensity emotion, or anything in between. So there's an emotional pattern. If the emotion that's activated as a result of this pattern match of this new piece of information, if it's really low, if it's not, a scary, stress-inducing pattern match, then you can have a thought. Then you can think about it. Then you can contextualize it. Then you can process that information. If we're on the other side and it was a triggering piece of information that came in, then you're not going to be able to have that thought. And this was the addition to the CBT model, was sometimes you don't have access to the thought because your emotion comes before the thought. So this was revolutionary in terms of my understanding, and in terms of understanding our brains, not only for me in terms of what I was going through, but also this is a huge leap in terms of trauma therapy. So, moving right along. So your healing toolbox. So based on how we understand now that this is how information is processed in our brain, we can use that information to help us strategize how we can get our needs met. Okay, so we want to remove barriers to getting our needs met. So we know where we're going, right? We know that we have all these needs, and that's the goal. I want to meet these needs. And we have these resources, and we want to use these potential barriers to see if there are any barriers preventing me from utilizing my resources to meet my needs. So we're going to go through one at a time. So you can ask yourself, toxic environment, can I get emotional nourishment from my environment? And that's, one kind of lens to look through. Am I in an environment? Do I have people around me? Am I my physical environment where I can get my needs met? Then your physical and emotional needs, equally important. And what can you do if that's not the case? How can you improve your environment to bring in more things or remove things that are detrimental to your meeting your needs? Second one, am I able to use my resources to meet my needs? Are there skill gaps? Am I able to connect with people? Am I able to use that skill, for that resource, for building rapport with other people? As an example, communication skills, any of them. Am I using my imagination properly? How can I shift how I'm using it, and becoming aware of how you're meeting or how you're using your resources, and what ways are you using them? Are they constructive? Are they not so constructive? And the third one, trauma. Am I able to calm myself down if I get emotionally triggered? And this is a big thing. Everybody, we're all different, and we all have different things that calm us down. And this is kind of like the litmus test that I use for, I mean, for myself, for my clients, for anybody in my life. If you're able to calm yourself down, then that's a great thing. If you're not able to calm yourself down, it might be a good idea to find professional help. So these are kind of the three buckets we can use the barriers to see how in my life with the resources I'm working with, can I remove as many barriers as possible. Okay. So anything that does these three, oh, and now I have to move this again. You can see the words. There you go. So in processing trauma, anything that does these three things will allow that information, that traumatic, unprocessed information that's stuck in your limbic system to be processed. So accessing the high emotional information, such as having a pattern match, or even thinking about that thing. Anyone who's had anything traumatic happen in their lives, you can just think about it. You can have a conversation about it, and all of a sudden you're there, right? Doesn't matter if it was 50 years ago. If it hasn't been processed and it has that high intensity emotion attached to the information there, it's in your limbic system, it's being pattern matched to, and all of a sudden you're back at that memory when maybe you were 5 and you feel like you're 5 again because it hasn't been processed. So accessing, having it, bringing up that memory or that template. And if you can do that and calm your brain down, which after you flip your lid, connects your brain again, allowing that information to go and to be processed, to connect with your neocortex and be processed normally, how your brain processes information all the time. So if you can access that traumatic information and calm down your limbic system, and then go through that traumatic information while your brain is calm, it allows the traumatic information to be freed because your brain is connected. And it allows that information to be reprogrammed. So you're taking off that high intensity emotion and you're calming your brain down and you're reprogramming it with a calm emotion. So anything that does these three things will help you process traumatic information. The rewind does this very safely, very effectively, and it's the technique that gave me my life back. And it's what Human Givens uses because it is so safe and effective. The only time it would not be potentially as effective is if you have someone who doesn't have full access to their imagination or is on more of the autistic spectrum. It might be more difficult, and you can be creative about how you would deal with trauma. But so I like to state these three criteria because sometimes, and actually a lot of times, as we go through life, we get more distant from traumatic events or memories that we have. A lot of times we'll naturally process some of it, bits and pieces of it, maybe all of it. Everybody's different, and everybody's ability to go back, revisit memories, and process them while their brain is calm is different. Everybody's capacity to do that is different. So it's possible for you to go and go about your life and think about one example. I noticed something that had nothing to do with the rape that I experienced, but I've had other upsetting things happen, and I remember kind of different periods of my life thinking about them, and when it was closer to the event, feeling it in my body, and then after time would go by, I remember I love to take walks. So that's take walks in nature. And so as I go on my walks, if I think about those things, because I'm in a natural environment that calms me down and I feel like I can breathe better, it can help me process that. So that's just something that works for me. And we're going to talk about tools a little later, but understanding what calms your brain down what works for you to get you in that state where your brain is connected. As you start to understand your language with you and your body, your relationship with your brain and your body, you can start to craft different tools or different routines or things you can add to your life or take out of your life to kind of help to create a more conducive environment to processing this information. Okay. So tools, calming down your brain, as I was just saying. These are some examples. Let me move this down again. So these are some examples of something, and some of these work for everybody, like the 7-11 breath, you'll notice over here. So 7-11 breathing is one of the most efficient ways to calm down your autonomic nervous system. And so what that is a normal inhale and an extended slow exhale through the nose. And what this does is it stimulates the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the relaxation response. So it helps to stimulate that. That's connected to your out breath. So the longer your out breath is, the more you're preferentially stimulating the parasympathetic system. It also helps to balance the pH of your blood, because when you're really stressed, you're getting, the fight or flight response, right? So your body is preparing for action. Either it's going to run or it's going to fight. And you need oxygen in your limbs, right? In your legs, in your action muscles. So when you're in that state, you have potentially a lot of energy to do something. So the pH is off. There's more, the oxygen and carbon dioxide levels are off. The pH is off. So in doing this breath, you can help to balance those levels. And I'm going to skip over to exercise right here. Exercise also can do that because your body is preparing for action. If you can complete that circuit and do an action, whether it's take a walk, take a run, do jumping jacks, or, run in place, if you're at work, go into the bathroom and run in place, or, be creative. But if you can do something to utilize that oxygen that's in your blood because it wants to do an action, that can naturally complete the cycle. And it tells your body, oh, all right, you've done something. That's good. It's okay, we can calm down now. You've done something. So that's another way to do that. Talking about the pH in your blood, right next to that, earthing. So connecting with the earth, touching a tree. We can have an exchange of negative ions, get more negative ions from the earth. We're so disconnected from the earth with the rubber soles of our shoes, with concrete, and there are all these wonderful negative ions that help us to regulate our blood pH. And going out, touching a rock, putting your hands in the dirt, planting a plant, whatever it is, whatever you have access to, can also be really calming to your brain. So doing a flow activity, laughing and playing, all of these things can help to calm us down. Ultimately, getting your needs met is the antidote for stress. And so depending on where you are in your life, what your situation is, what your environment is like, it might not be that, oh, one day I can get all my needs met now that I know that these are my needs. But this can be, you can have a roadmap. You can set goals to changing the direction of your life to more meet your needs. So understanding what calms you down, can give you access to your brain. So as I was saying earlier, if you're triggered and you're able to calm yourself down, wonderful. Do that. Work through those triggers. If that's something that feels good to you and that you'd like to do, you can always ask for help. If all of those tools that you have access to, if you don't have the capacity to calm yourself down, please seek professional help, because you don't have to be suffering with these triggers. And of course, if you have the capacity to calm yourself down and you would like some help, by all means. But if you don't, I don't want to, I can't stress that enough, that you don't have to be suffering with these triggers. And that's it. I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Thank you so much, Katherine. I have a few questions, but we can also just open this up to people who are still with us and want to ask a good question. Oh, would you mind putting up that slide, the last slide again, so they can write down your website and email?
So I'll share my screen again.
Or you can type it in the chat if you'd like. Do you want to do that? You can do that too.
Yeah.
Okay, why don't you just type it in the chat box? So I think one thing, I mean, a couple of questions I have is, I think that often when we've been through something, this life-changing experience, we often spend a lot of time looking for providers who can help us, and we go to a lot of different people searching for somebody who understands, and that can be a really frustrating process when you're trying to find what works for you. And I think also that you have to find what works for you, right? And that what works for one person to access this, right? Like I think the brain works similarly, but in accessing and being able to process things, like there are different ways, like there are different ways to calm yourself down. And there's different ways that, the person that's going to help you through it is going to be different for everyone, but it can be a frustrating process as you're trying to find help. I mean, you found that to be true, right? Like it took you a long time.
Absolutely. I had to go to another country.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And you're right. It's so important that you have something that resonates with you. And that's why I like to give those three, and I'm happy to share my slides so that people can have that information. But those three things: accessing the traumatic template, calming yourself down in whatever way is right for you, and going back and forth. If you can do that, you can process it, and some people can do that through meditation. Some people can do that through thinking about it on a walk in nature, or swimming, whatever calms you down. And that's where really understanding you and how your brain works is really useful.
So someone asked in the beginning, she said, do you think the rewind technique can be used faster than 5 years? So I'm assuming that yes is the answer. Yeah.
Absolutely. I only waited 5 years because I didn't know about it, because I had to go on a mission. As soon as I had after that session, I realized that I needed to study this and bring it to the US. And for a few years, I was the only human givens practitioner in the US. Now we have a second. Now there's someone else in, I believe, Oregon. So I'm in Portland, Maine. So now there are 2 of us in the US who are doing this.
Yeah. And then the other thing that's just been coming a lot up for me and for us at Return to Zero is the idea that trauma is so stored in your body as well. And that all the things that most of them about how to calm ourselves down, or a lot of them are about moving the stuff, moving your body. Even laughter is like moving the energy in your body, that type of stuff. So that's really important. Like, it is like, it's not just mental or emotional or spiritual, it's physical also. And it's important to know that.
Absolutely. And I think I mentioned in the beginning, I had this weird set of symptoms where I felt like my bones were vibrating and I could feel it in my body. And it was something that I didn't ever experienced before that. And so, you know, the yoga exercise is really good for that, you know, and moving the energy, laughter will cure anything. So.
Okay, so I have a couple of questions from our participants. So what do you do if the traumatic experience keeps flashing in your head? Example, you're waking up in the middle of the night and the traumatic experience. So you're having, it's flashbacks and it's causing problems sleeping.
Yeah. That sounds like one of the examples of not being able to. So a question, are you able to calm yourself down in the middle of the night? Is that
No, that's a no.
no? So then my suggestion would be a rewind would be very, very helpful, or anything that does those three things that I mentioned. That's where you're being triggered and it's an intrusive memory, it's a flashback.
Yeah. Okay. Another question is, how does this approach work with grief?
Grief is such a complicated emotion, and everyone experiences it differently. And whether there is guilt or anger or whatever is tied up with that grief, and for every person it's going to be different. It's a high intensity emotion. So all of these high intensity emotions act the same way, and they're stuck in our limbic system. So while getting a rewind or a series of rewinds would not grieve for you, it can allow the trauma part of that to be neutralized so that you can go through your process. Does that make sense? So if you're grieving and being re-traumatized all the time, you can be grieving indefinitely and re-traumatizing yourself. And that's a cycle that I see a lot. And by having the traumatic part of that equation neutralized, it almost like allows you to go into that grieving process and to go through that process. Does that make sense? Does that help?
Another question, oh my God. Another question from Stephanie is, she's asking if you have closure.
Me personally?
You personally, yes.
I
That's not the best word, I would say. It's more like, have you processed it, and can you engage in life again? And yeah.
Yeah, so I was able to process after I was not being re-traumatized all the time. So it's kind of, it's like anything. I do feel like I have closure now. And I feel like, let me see, it was probably like 6 months or a year, probably about a year after I had that first rewind, that I felt like I could forgive. And for me, closure, that I experience it as forgiveness. And so I was able to forgive them after about a year. And it took me another maybe 6 months or a year to be able to forgive myself. So at this point, yes. So it allowed me, kind of like the grief question, it allowed me to go through my process, because I wasn't going through any process for about 5 years. I was just in this heightened state of PTSD, of like full emotional arousal, hypervigilance. And so I could go through my process of letting go and finding my own closure and forgiving.
Yeah. Another question is, if the stored trauma is left unresolved, can it become a phobia?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So with that pattern match mechanism, if you have something that's traumatic and you keep building on it, so the patterns can be built in a positive way as you're learning more things and embellishing how you understand the world. And it can also happen in the kind of more negative understanding of it, where you have a trauma, piece of information that's traumatic, and you keep adding to it. So yes, so it can turn into a phobia, it can grow, it can expand, and that's basically how I was experiencing it. I felt like I was being closed in on as more and more things were triggering, and I didn't understand why.
Okay, another question is, I work with a lot of moms that have sexual trauma from when they were children that they've suppressed. And then when they become pregnant and give birth, it brings back all that trauma. Would you recommend teaching the calming techniques or trying to set up with professional help right away? I guess so. What would your recommendation be?
Yeah, I mean, for any of these examples, if someone is being triggered, my recommendation is going to be do something that is either a rewind or that does what a rewind does. There are other ways, because it makes perfect sense that that's the same body, body parts are being activated if you have traumatic information and energy stored there. Being pregnant would be very stimulating to that area. So that makes perfect sense. So yes, calming techniques. The 7-Eleven breath is one of the fastest ways to calm someone down. You can go from a full-blown panic attack to perfectly normal in 14 minutes of doing that breath. So anything, and I would say I would defer to the person, what calms you down. A rewind is going to work for the majority of people and help them have access to more of their brains so that they can then better utilize their resources to further calm themselves down in their own life.
Thank you. And then Kate asked a question. I'm not exactly, I might need more clarification. So she says, between grief and trauma, how do you cut out trauma? She's going to rewatch, but she wanted a quick review. But do you understand what she's asking?
How do you, well, so it's kind of like that grief question, right? It's if you're going through grief and trauma at the same time, you might not be able to do the grief thing because you're being you're being triggered all the time. So processing and neutralizing that information is going to give you more space to do the grieving that you have to do to find your own closure.
And I know for me, like in my own situation, that there was like the trauma around the death of my baby, but then there's also the trauma of my interaction with my medical team that and things that happened there. So it was like two kinds of trauma that had to be eventually dealt with before I could deal with the sadness of the grief.
Yeah, and a lot of these situations are so complicated where there's different levels and kind of interconnectedness of traumatic feelings. So that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Someone's asking about blaming. So I think that, right, like, I think I'm going to assume that this has to do with perhaps dealing with people in the hospital, like doctors or partners. Okay, so, I mean, so it's both. Processing the, I'm just, sorry, I apologize for my pauses. I'm just reading. So she's saying like her doctors and her husband blaming. So did something happen, Leilani, that you are blaming them or for what happened? Yes. Well, yes, her baby was stillborn. But are you having a hard time forgiving other people for their part in what was happening? They didn't look at your so not listening to you, which I hear a lot, like women are not listened to.
So there might be anger that's involved there. You know, there might be other, it might be more of like a cocktail of high intense negative emotions. Absolutely.
I mean, I think looking up forgiving other people, right, is very much a part of a trauma. And that in the end, a lot of the times the forgiveness is for yourself, right? Like forgiving somebody else is for yourself, so you can feel more centered and grounded. And you have to come to a place of acceptance and forgiveness, even if they did do something wrong. Like,
It's not saying it's okay.
yeah,
It absolutely, it's so important, and letting it, because we were talking about that physical connection to the memories, and that can be, you're physically holding on to that. So until you are able to do that, to get to have that forgiveness, your body is holding on to it. And so in forgiving, you're giving it back almost. You're releasing it from your system.
yeah. Well, I think no other questions have come in, but I think that was a very thorough presentation. And you're okay sharing your slides?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, so I will send out a PDF of the slides along with the recording to everybody. And I want to say, Katherine, thank you for being here, for being vulnerable and sharing your experience, and for donating your time to help our community. And I just want to say to everybody watching that we are able to offer these webinars free because of the generosity of donors. So if you have it in you to make a small donation for watching this and making available to other people so we can continue this, that would be very, very helpful. So thank you everybody for being here, for spending your time with us. And I hope that you can walk away with some tools for your own journey. Thank you.